most of us waited in line at a department store or at the old town square to see Santa Claus and tell him what we wanted for Christmas. Usually we got a small bag of candy, fruit, and nuts from the jolly old elf as we left. Were you ever tempted to get back in line and try to fool St. Nick into giving you a second treat? Well, L. Craig did, and found out the hard way what happened when Santa said no. I remember a Christmas a long time ago, maybe it was 60 years or so, when Santa came to our town square. 'Twas the biggest event since the county fair. He gave us fruit and peppermint candy, and he even hugged my friend Andy. We ate our treats by the statue of Lincoln, and something there started me a-thinkin'. I heard this voice that came from within saying, "Why not get in line again? He will think you're a brand new kid." Sounded good, and so I did. When my turn came, Santa didn't say ho. He just shook his head and said, "Oh no." Then the tears rushed from my eyes. How could I fool someone so wise? I cried so hard I could hardly see, and all the town did stare at me. My legs were weak. How could I stand? Then someone took me by the hand. "I'm sorry, Fred," someone spoke. "You have to watch these little folk." It was my mother. She was concerned, but later said, "'Tis a lesson learned." Many nights I wondered as I lay in bed, why did Mama call old Santa Fred? Many a Christmas pageant came off without major catastrophe. That wasn't the way it happened for Charlene Taylor, however. To sum it up, hark, the tinsel angel cried, "Mrs. Pricharch killed him!"
Every Christmas, Edna Pricharch descended on our one-room school like a traditional curse. The barbarous woman came in to help with the Christmas pageant, but in actuality she dictated every role and movement. Most of the time the teacher let Mrs. Pricharch have things her own way, but the year Mrs. Dettell decided that Art Smith was going to play Joseph was a year that nearly went down in infamy. I learned of the argument between Mrs. Pricharch and the teacher when I crept into the cloakroom for my mittens during recess. That's when I heard Mrs. Pricharch bellow, "I can't believe you actually expect me to cast Art Smith as Joseph." Though she couldn't see me, her words made me freeze in my puddling boots. Mrs. Dettell replied, "Yes, Edna, I do." Then Mrs. Pricharch snorted, "Art Smith is a sullen, insolent boy, and you mark my words, Lila." And I could just picture Edna shaking her enormous index finger at Mrs. Dettell to mark her words. "Art Smith will cause nothing but trouble." Well, if Mrs. Pricharch had been hard on us before, she was a regular drill sergeant that year. Nobody did anything right, especially Art. He didn't walk right, he didn't stand right, he didn't even hold his mouth right. "Arthur, don't purse your lips like that," Edna barked during one practice. Though Art's peers encouraged him to stand up for himself, the boy seemed to take the woman's nonsense in stride. He never sassed her, and he tried to do exactly as Mrs. Pricharch commanded, even though at times that could be a little discombobulating. Even Huldah Trent, the woman who came in to play the piano, was observed rolling her eyes from time to time. Then came the dress rehearsal. Most dress rehearsals are not exactly anything to write home about, but we were about to witness a new creation, something that could have made headlines. The pageant started to unfold while the choir, of which I was part, sang "O Little Town of Bethlehem." Mary and Joseph strolled down the aisle from the back of the room. Mary's blue veiled head was bowed in humility. Joseph tagged along behind her, wrapped in his father's bathrobe, his headdress made from a dingy white pillowcase, which was secured by a rolled-up handkerchief knotted tightly in the back. It definitely looked like your typical 1940s Christmas pageant fair, but Art seemed to be walking with a certain air of dignity which I had never noticed in him before. At the front of the room, Mary knelt behind the manger, and Joseph stood behind her. Angels we have heard on high brought the heavenly host down the same path, with Bethany Weingartner as leader of the pack. With her head of golden Shirley Temple curls and dimpled cheeks, I could tell that Bethany thought she was the cutest little Gabriel who ever donned a set of tinsel wings. But then, Bethany had a way of making most girls feel like a green hornet in a butterfly contest anyhow. At the manger, the angels were gathering around Mary and Joseph when Mrs. Pricharch stopped the action. Something wasn't right. One of the angels fluttered wrong or something. So Edna made the angels go to the back and re-enter. They gathered around the front, and Bethany stood at Joseph's left, beaming like the new neon sign over Joe's Bar and Grill. After Silent Night and Away in a Manger, the shepherds shuffled on down the aisle, looking like smaller versions of Joseph in their oversized bathrobes and pillowcased heads. However, the wise men were better attired, cobbled up in old purple robes that Mrs. Pricharch found at a church rummage sale. "The wise men need to look more elegant," she announced, and everybody knew that if Edna Pricharch could have it her way, they would have lumbered in on camels. Then Edna determined that the wise men would do a kind of Pharaoh's strut to We Three Kings, but their turbans made them top-heavy, and they looked a little like watermelon heads as they weaved and wobbled their way to crowd in at the front. Arnie Crump stepped on Willie Biggs's toe. That called for the wise men to strut their stuff all over again. After we sang the first Noel and Joy to the World, Bethany stepped forward to sing the solo parts with the choir for backup. The whole pageant took about an hour from start to finish, eliminating interruptions, that is. However, the first time was not enough. Something wasn't right. Mrs. Pricharch wasn't happy. Everybody had to exit and go through the whole thing all over again. And the third time brought more than groans. It was while the choir was singing, "Oh, Come Let Us Adore Him," that Mrs. Pricharch yelled, "Arthur, stand up straight." Suddenly, Art started slapping himself in the face with both hands. At first, I thought it was some kind of crude protest, a nervous breakdown, or worse yet, something awful like a fit. But then he toppled sideways, like a falling statue, pinning Bethany's feet between himself and the wall. "He's dead! He's dead! Mrs. Pricharch killed him!" Bethany shrieked. I froze like the icicles outside the schoolhouse windows as I stared at Art, or Joseph, or whoever he was, lying as still as one of the fallen tombstones in the graveyard up the hill. Somehow Bethany was able to dance her feet out from under Art's prostrate body. But she was still hysterical and ready to flee the scene until Mrs. Dutel grabbed a hold of her. Shaking her hard, Mrs. Dutel said, "Art isn't dead, he fainted." The whole room seemed to sigh in relief. Mrs. Pricharch was beside Art, elevating his head and snatching off his costume. After Mrs. Dutel had Bethany calmed down, she turned to aid Mrs. Pricharch in helping a now more or less revived Art to his staggering feet. Together, the two women escorted the boy to a nearby desk. Well, if we thought the excitement was over for the day, we were in for a rude awakening, for as soon as Art was seated, he jumped back up and tore off toward the door of the cloakroom. However, he didn't make it out of the room before he upchucked. Needless to say, Mrs. Dutel turned the groaning bunch of us loose, and we all scurried out of that place and off for home as quickly as our churning stomachs could carry us. It was thanks to old Tinsel Wings that we found out what happened after we left. It seems the incident had scared the Gabriel right out of Bethany, and she wanted to dump her wings, so she lingered in the cloakroom for a chance to speak with the teacher alone. When Edna thought everybody was gone, the woman blasted Mrs. Dutel with, "See? It was just a stunt like that I was trying to warn you against when you insisted on having Art Smith as Joseph." Bethany inserted, "I couldn't believe that Mrs. Pricharch was actually accusing Art of doing that on purpose." When she said that, Mrs. Dutel came right back at Mrs. Pricharch with, "What do you expect when you drill like a Nazi general?" My breath caught. With World War II fresh at our backs, to call anybody a Nazi anything was the worst of offenses, and even I knew that Edna Pritchard was not the type to ignore such an insult. Then Bethany said, I peeked through the crack in the door and saw Mrs. Dutel's hand fly to her mouth, like she hadn't meant to say that, while Mrs. Pritchard's head appeared to swell up and turn red like the bulb of a thermometer. Then Mrs. Pritchard hissed, I'll have your job for that statement, Lila. She was a member of the school board, and we all knew that she could and probably would do just that. Needless to say, we feared the worst for our teacher. But then a miracle happened, or so it seemed. The next night was the night of the pageant, and everybody was bustling around helping each other get dressed. Mrs. Dutel was helping the shepherds, and I was tying Bethany's wings on her when suddenly Mrs. Pritchard stepped through the outside door. A complete stillness engulfed the room. Mrs. Dutel and Mrs. Pritchard just peered at each other over the children's heads, as if they were seeing each other for the first time. Bethany and I glanced at each other. I knew we were both wondering the same thing. Was this the beginning of the end? Mrs. Pritchard started toward Mrs. Dutel. Here, Lila, let me take care of that while you start lining up the children, she said. Thank you, Edna, Mrs. Dutel replied, and herded some of the children through the doorway into the main room. Well, if Edna Pritchard had been hard on Art before, that night she fawned over him as if he were a newborn kitten. Are you sure you feel all right, Art? The pageant went off perfectly, as pageants and plays have a way of doing after a disastrous dress rehearsal. And after the last hallelujah, Mrs. Dutel stepped to the front of the room. I would like to thank all the children for giving us such an excellent performance this evening, she said, and there was resounding applause. And, Mrs. Dutel said as the clapping subsided, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Edna Pritchard, who gave of her time and energy beyond the call of duty to come and help us make this pageant the huge success it was. Again there was hearty applause as parents smiled and nodded at Edna Pritchard. Then, after Mrs. Dutel thanked Huldah Trent, she turned us loose for refreshments and presents. Mrs. Dutel didn't lose her job and was at Worden School until it was consolidated some years later. Mrs. Pritchard went on helping out every year with the Christmas pageants, only she was a changed woman, more congenial, less pushy, and always kind to Art.
Here is Dennis Day on the Fibber, McGee, and Molly Show from September 13th, 1949, performing the old favorite, I'll Take You Home, Kathleen.
Where will feel no pain. And when your fields are fresh and green, I'll take you to your home
Christmas clubs became popular in the 1950s and even continue at some banks today. That's where you put back a little money each week so Christmas buying doesn't hurt quite as much at the end of the year. Art Brown and his family save their Christmas money another way. Travel back with Art as he remembers the Nutty Christmas Club.
Even after 50 years, I can vividly remember seeing 5 100-pound gunny sacks of pecans drying on our back porch in Louisiana, Missouri, a small town of 5,000 on the Mississippi River near Hannibal, Missouri. The number of pounds of pecans gathered in the fall determined what kind of Christmas our family would have. 500 pounds was a very good year. That was the year, 1948, that I received a Lionel train set for Christmas. We still had nearly a month and a half to prepare the pecans for selling. Saturday and Sunday, after Sunday school, were always pecan hunting days for our family. Half the time we searched for big pecan trees next to the road, or in fields that weren't privately owned. At other times we picked at privately owned pecan orchards. Sometimes we paid a fee to pick, and sometimes we picked on halves. The owner got half of what we picked. Picking on halves was probably the best way to do it. You had twice the labor, but you didn't have to pay a fee. The average orchard pecan was a good bit larger than the average wild pecan. Some orchard pecans were squatty, shaped like the wild ones, but they were half again larger than the wild ones. Most orchard pecans were the paper shell variety. Their shells were somewhat thinner than the nearly round ones. They were between 2 and 3 inches long and almost cylindrical, about the size of your thumb. We went through several methods of gathering the pecans. We began by simply picking up the ones we could see, or by just scratching around in the dry leaves. We tried raking the leaves under the trees, leaving most of the pecans visible on the bare ground. This method worked, but it was time-consuming and hard work. Our dad was quite innovative and came up with one of the best ways to gather pecans. After scratch picking from under a tree, we laid down a large tarp, 30 by 30. We then tied a 4-ounce lead fishing sinker to a long nylon line before throwing it over the limbs. After shaking the reachable limbs above the tarp, we raised the tarp's corners, causing the pecans to go to the center. Easy pickings now. This idea worked so well that I couldn't imagine Dad coming up with an even better method. He bought another 30 by 30 tarp and spread the 2 tarps under both sides of the tree. After leaning an old tire against the trunk of the tree, Dad eased the front bumper of our black 1937 Chevy up to the tire. He could bump the tree pretty hard now without doing damage to the tree or the bumper. Today there are mechanical devices for this purpose, but the old bumper car method worked fine. After all our pecans had dried at least 30 days, we began our process of preparing them for sale. We started out using small handheld nutcrackers, but it was hard to get the meat out whole. Dad invested in a squirrel nutcracker. It's a device that clamped to your kitchen table and had an 18-inch lever handle. You cracked the pecans one at a time. The meat nearly always came out with the 2 sides whole. We had an assembly line going. Mom put the pecans in big pots of boiling water on the stove. The sudden change in temperature caused the nut meat to separate from the shell. Dad cracked the pecans and pitched them to the center of the table. I was 7 at that time, 1948. My sister Penny was 9, and our brother Bobby was 3. We 3 kids were the pickers. In fact, we got to pick them up, and we got to pick them out. Mom worked both ends of our assembly line. After she had heated a goodly amount of pecans, she moved to the kitchen table with us. Mom was the jar packer. Most of the pecan halves came out whole. Sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? It's not. She packed the unbroken pecans in quart jars, separating them from the broken ones. After the whole 500 pounds of pecans were in quart jars, we loaded them into our car. Every Saturday until Christmas, and parked in front of the bank downtown. We didn't even have to get out of our car to make a sale. The whole halves sold for $1 a quart, and the broken ones sold for about 50 cents a quart. That was good money in those days, especially when all the labor was free, a true family labor of love. After picking up pecans all day, as soon as you shut your eyes, you continued picking up pecans in your mind's eye. You mind-picked pecans until bedtime. Then you dreamed about picking pecans. Funny thing, by morning, all of your mind pecans had been picked. You no longer saw them when you shut your eyes.
The youngest daughter in a family of several girls rarely got anything but hand-me-downs. Donna Glynn wanted a dress of her own in the worst way. Would her mother's pragmatism win out and doom her to always wearing her sister's outgrown clothes? Or would her father for once win out and get her the red dress?
My mother always got her own way. That's just the way it was at our house. But one Christmas, she didn't. The event stands out in my mind even though I was only 7 years old at the time. The whole thing started on a bright, hot day in August. My 10-year-old sister, Lizzie, and I were on our way to piano lessons. We walked the mile or two each way every Saturday afternoon for a 1-hour lesson each. We'd been talking as we walked along about stealing apples from Mrs. Kennedy, our piano teacher, during the lesson. It was a standing practice for us every week. We knew Mrs. Kennedy would give us all the apples we wanted, but it was much more fun and exciting to plot and plan and steal them. "Now remember," Lizzie said, "you go first, and I'll start piling apples under the old willow tree. Then when I go in, you can finish gathering them and put them in your book bag." I didn't answer her. We'd been doing this every Saturday since the apples started dropping. Besides, I had something else on my mind. "Katie, are you listening to me? You have to remember to leave your books on the piano so your bag will be empty." "I know, Lizzie, I know. I'll remember. I'm just thinking about something else," I answered. "Well, what is it?" Lizzie asked. "Let's talk about it, or you'll be in such a daze you'll mess up and we'll get caught." "I'm thinking about my birthday. You know it's just 2 weeks away." "Well, what about it?" Lizzie was getting exasperated. "What is there to worry about?" "Because I want to ask Ma for a new dress, and I know I won't get it." "You got that right," said Lizzie. "You know you won't. Girls with 2 older sisters don't get new dresses." "But it's not fair," I shouted. "I'm going to be 7 years old, and I've never had a new dress." By this time, we were at Mrs. Kennedy's. "And don't forget," Lizzie said, "when I play Faith of Our Fathers, you'll know that it's my last song. You take the apples and head on up the road so Mrs. Kennedy won't see them." Our plan went off smoothly, as usual. It was getting so easy it wasn't as much fun anymore, and my mind was still on my birthday. But I didn't want to get Lizzie ticked off at me, so I did my part. The hot days of summer went by fast, as they always do, and before I knew it, there were only 2 days until my birthday. I had hinted to Ma several times about what I wanted. She hadn't really responded, and I wasn't sure she had even heard me. It wasn't that Ma was naturally mean and hateful, or that she didn't love me, but there were 7 of us to feed and clothe. Pa farmed for a living, and times were hard at the tail end of the Depression in the 1930s. Still, on this night, I decided to risk everything and ask her straight out about the dress. "Ma, would you like me to bathe the baby for you?" I asked. "That would be nice, Katie," Ma said. So far, so good. She didn't look suspicious. I bathed Timmy and tucked him in the crib with his bottle. Then I walked into the living room where Ma and Pa were relaxing before going to bed. As usual, Ma was mending and Pa was looking at seed and machinery catalogs. "Ma, I've been thinking about my birthday," I said. "You haven't asked me what I wanted, but I thought maybe I'd just tell you." "Now, Katie," Ma said, "you know you always get underwear and socks and things you need for school on your birthday." "Oh, Ma, couldn't I just this once have a new dress? Please? I've never had one, and I'll be 7 years old." "I'm sorry, Katie," Ma said. "I wish I could get one for you, but we just can't afford it. Now go on to bed. It's late." I looked at Pa to see if there was any help there. He was smiling at me, and I could tell he didn't like to see me unhappy. But all he said was, "Do as your mother tells you, Katie." So I went to bed and dreamed about a beautiful red dress. Soon it was my birthday. When I opened my presents, there was cotton underwear, new pajamas, socks, and a box of new pencils for school. I forgot my disappointment in the excitement of starting second grade. I was wearing hand-me-down dresses, but so were a lot of my friends. A week after Thanksgiving, the weather turned cold. It snowed almost every day, and Pa and my older brothers were kept busy digging their way to the barn and other outbuildings. Nights were cold in our two-story house, with only the banked wood-burning stoves. On one of those freezing nights, I was coming down the stairs in the dark to use the bathroom. I didn't mean to be sneaky or eavesdrop, but bare feet are quiet, and Ma and Pa's door was open. "I don't think you should spend that much on a dress for her." Ma's voice was low and angry. "It's too late," Pa answered. "I already bought it." He was talking softly, and as usual trying to placate Ma. I stood still, frozen in my tracks. I was afraid to move for fear I would make a noise and they would think I listened on purpose. "Well, you can just take it back. There's no sense in spoiling her like that. It's too expensive." I heard Ma get out of bed and pace the floor. Pa's voice came out loud and clear this time. "She's never had anything pretty or anything of her own. I'm giving her the dress, and I don't want to hear another word about it." I had never heard Pa use that tone of voice with Ma. With us kids, yes, but never with her. In the silence that followed, I crept back up the stairs. I was afraid to come downstairs the next morning, but everything was just like always. And Christmas morning, oh, what excitement! A beautiful dress with a full red taffeta skirt that whispered and sighed every time I moved. It had a black velvet top with red taffeta trim and a big red bow that tied in the back. "Oh, it's beautiful," I said. "Thank you, Ma and Pa. Can I put it on now? Oh, please." "You can put it on and wear it all day," said Pa. "You'll be very pretty." He smiled at me and looked at Ma. She didn't say a word, but she smiled too. I'm grown now, with children and grandchildren of my own. My mother and father are both gone. No word was ever said about what I overheard that night, but it always made a special bond between Pa and me. And I still have the red dress. I'll never forget the time Pa didn't let Ma have her own way.